in um, Death of Artemio Cruz, because her father was very like connected to religion, and so she had to perform her duty to her father and then kind of enter into his religion. And so like another thing that I noticed about religion and duty and women was that like the women characters in a lot of these novels, whereas they were like kind of challenging their social standards, they were also challenging religion. Like the woman, like in Portrait in Sepia, um, Paulina is a woman who is not,
Yeah,
the
she's
typical
not
Chilean at
religious
all.
at
Yeah,
all.
not religious at all, and goes against a lot of Chile's values, and so the upper social class is pretty disdainful of her for that.
Yeah, like that's the point I brought up when I thought of that. And like she still went to church even though she didn't believe at all, but she knew that it was like her duty as like someone who was in like the higher social class, that if she wanted to be accepted into that, like Chile is so religious that she wouldn't be able to like not attend mass and still have like friends and people who wouldn't shun her, because it's like it was your duty as someone who was supposed to be like well respected to kind of, I guess, participate in the correct religion, like the one that was really um, like well spread out like throughout the country, like the main religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like in Chile, it seems like in their culture, like you wouldn't even question, like, um, Christianity. It's just so like instilled in everyone's mind. It seems like even Aurora, who's like this really bright young woman, it's like she just has like these daily rituals that involves religion, and she doesn't question it for a long time, despite her, her growing and getting accustomed to having her own ideas in her mind and kind of growing into her own person. And I think it's really interesting when Paulina moves to Chile and she starts going to church for social status and respect. But I think it was like right before she died, she started going there just because she wanted to.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting how, and like it was nice and refreshing because she started to go because she wanted to be involved and not like spiritually instead of just for respect.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah. All right, are you guys ready to move on to the next question?
Okay. Yeah.
Last question. Culturally, how do you think sickness and death are thought of in Central and South America rather than how we view them in the United States?
It's like in this era especially, sickness is like so common and like it's such a huge deal with like cholera and typhus, and it's devastating, as especially in this in Love in the Time of Cholera, even though it's not part of the main plot. It's just like little subplots that come up. Like there was a huge epidemic in I think the somewhere in the Caribbean where they just like dead bodies littered everywhere as they were floating over in their hot air balloon ride, and that's just like really powerful. Like just how could there just be like death and they can just like go on being rich and like being in a hot air balloon for the first time, like visiting their old hometown and just like ignoring all that. It's really
Yeah, that's something I definitely noticed, that like in other cultures, you don't really, death isn't this like really big like advertised thing. Like if you're sick, you're not really supposed to go like outside. You're not supposed to see anybody. And like you wouldn't really tell someone like, oh, like my aunt is sick right now. Whereas in America, we're always talking about like who's sick. If you're going to a doctor's appointment, like if you have a therapist, like we're always very open about that kind of thing. Whereas I think in other cultures, they're a lot more reserved about it.
And I think that there was also something in Love in the Time of Cholera they mentioned about death and sickness, and certain deaths and sickness were considered deaths and sickness of the rich that were like either the night before a big holiday suddenly without any warning, and then everyone had to like they couldn't celebrate because they had to be mourning this rich person, or it was like a really publicized, really like oh gosh, here's the next update in their illness.
Yeah.
And for the death of Artemio Cruz, um, I think that one it's showing like well Artemio Cruz personally from his inner monologues like he's viewing it as something like I mean it is degenerative, but he's viewing it as like negatively, like his greatness is going, his his legacy is leaving, his past is going, and all these things that he's done they don't mean as much anymore, even though he's still got his pride and stuff. But it's meaning less and less as he's continuing to die, and then actually something else I noticed was that religion always comes back in terms of death. Like the priests come back to collect confessions and to collect things like money
like the
and
last
donations.
rites.
Yeah, last rites, and that was something I noticed.
And like in the death of Artemio Cruz, like he wasn't religious and he was like trying to like curse God because he was sick and everything like that. And one of I think it was his daughter was saying, you know, like you're not religious, so why even bother?
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of realizing like, oh, like you're right, you know, then why is the priest here? But that's such a big part in their culture still that like since he's dying, like they have to have the last rites from the priest, otherwise it's not like a proper thing to do.
Yeah, and with like aging in general in these books, like because it's a lot of them are just about aging. I think that's like that so far hasn't been looked upon favorably. It's been looked on as like sort of like a passing of the time in a negative kind of way, and
Yeah, like you're weakening rather than just aging.
yeah, and like instead of you know wisening, you're not really allowed the same kind of privileges you had in your youth.
Yeah.
Like like in Love in the Time of Cholera, you're not supposed to be in love because people think that's gross, and
when you're
old
80,
age,
yeah.
That's true. Wow. Yeah, age has like this huge stigma there. It's like it's so um ineloquent. It's just like frowned upon, even though it's something you can't even control at all.
Yeah,
And
it happens to everybody. Everyone's going to age.
I think it's almost like funny how they that even age is tied into social status so much. Like this thing that happens to every human being in like the whole world. so such a big deal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think like aging is probably only like so far has been presented as something bad for people who like have something to lose from aging and from death, because otherwise like you guys were saying, it's not a big deal, and it was just thought of as just something that like just happened and everyone would continue on with their life. But for people who had something to lose from losing their youth, like it was a big deal.
Yeah. I think that's a really good ending point.
All right.